Hello, good evening, and welcome back. So, Trump has decided to show that he is in charge of the nation and wishes to reassure the citizens that he is doing his best to keep them safe and is, of course, following the Christian roots in doing so. And despite the churches being attacked, that they are still a place of worship and respect and worthy of reverence. But, of course, that's not how it's been taken. So, as the BBC say, Trump's church visit shocks religious leaders, and we'll get into just how wrong this is when we get to the polls in a moment, showing that American voters support use of military and National Guard in the riots, that he actually has the majority support to use the National Guard, despite the media trying to suggest otherwise, and they're just being exposed left, right and centre at this point. Their echo chamber has gotten out of hand, and despite being encapsulated in their own echo chamber, they're still pushing this out to other people who aren't in that echo chamber and are now realizing that this is absolutely ridiculous. So, as they say here, last night he held a Bible in front of St. John's Episcopal Church, just across the road from the White House. Today he'll visit the shrine to St. John Paul II, also in Washington, D.C., because they've been ravaged by the riots. But, of course, they're not going to mention this, and they're saying, oh, it's a widespread political protest. No, they're looters, they're rioters. They are killing people. This isn't just a little protest, not at all. So then you've got responses from various people saying, oh, it can't be right, and this saying is antithetical to the teachings of Jesus. What's actually given to Caesar's what is Caesar's. So it's actually agreeing with Jesus there. James Martin, a Jesuit priest and consultant of the Vatican's communication department, tweeted, "Let me be clear, this is revolting. The Bible is not a prop. A church is not a photo op. Religion is not a political tool. God is not your plaything." And other than it being revolting, then we agree that yes, it's not a proper or photo op. It's very symbolic of saying what it means, which is Donald Trump is still keeping people safe and trying to take control of the nation in order to stop the riots, and that the churches will still be open. That's the idea. Rabbi Jack Malin, president of the Interfaith Alliance, said, "Seeing President Trump standing in front of St. John's Episcopal Church while holding a Bible in response to calls for racial justice. Not true at all. That's not what they're about. They are opportunistic rioters. This is not about George Floyd's death. Not in the slightest." Because let's look at 2015, because we've got the figures there. If we're talking, oh, yeah, well, police are clearly just killing people left, right and centre. It's like, well, they make 10 million arrests per year. Of those 10 million interactions, 17 unarmed black people were shot by the police. 7 out of 10 million. This isn't about racial justice at all. Don't be ridiculous. And, of course, that's 10 million arrests, and they normally have about 3 to 5 visits. So it's about 50 million encounters a year. You get 17 unarmed black deaths, compared to 23 for white, as it happens. Which you might think, oh, that's almost equal, and more white people. Well, no, it's disproportionate for black people because they're only 13% of the population, but seeing as they're also responsible for 52% of the homicides, it's quite understandable that they would therefore be arrested more because they're committing more of the crime. It's not down to just race and, oh, they're picking the black race. No, they're arresting the criminals. Would you believe it? And therefore, of course, it's going to be a high proportion that are arrested that are black and that are shot by police that are black because they're the criminals. And compared to black on black killings, that was 6,000 in 2015 alone, compared to, I think it was 282 deaths from police. So if you really want to talk about Black Lives Matter, then tell that to the black communities from broken homes. That, as we've seen, I mean, Thomas Sowell likes to point it out as well, that as things have changed over the years, that we've seen before the 1960s, most black children were raised in two-parent families. In 2013, over 72% of blacks were born out of wedlock. And in Cook County, Chicago, 79% of blacks were from broken homes in 2003, while only 15% of whites were born in broken homes. And because that we know a straight line can be drawn between family breakdown and youth violence. So if you don't play the race card, we won't. We'll talk about women marrying the state instead, and that is terrible for the child's development. And maybe we need to sort that out instead of encouraging gang culture. Maybe that's the way to go. And maybe Kanye has a good idea then in trying to encourage the family unit. Wouldn't that be good? But trying to suggest that, as they go on to say, right after using military force to clear peaceful protesters is utter bullshit. Utter bullshit. There's a curfew in force in order to protect people, as you've got various places around that they just have explosions through the night, not knowing what it's caused. You can call the police, and the police say, well, we're in the city, we can't come out to the suburbs. Just do what you think is right, and then they'll hang up on you. In New York, for example, that's what we've seen. It's ridiculous. They're not peaceful protesters. We've seen the, I don't know how many zeros to add on now, of property damage being done, and people being killed, and maimed, and seriously injured. And we've seen 6 million guns being bought, 40% of them from first-time gun owners. That, yeah, people who may have been reticent about the Second Amendment, maybe they weren't sure, maybe they were against it, that now they're very glad that they have it because they can actually defend themselves. And when it comes down to magazine size as well, and, oh, how many rounds can you have? So, oh, we should limit it to 6 because then it's safer. Well, cool, you got a dozen rioters coming at you. Fire a couple of warning shots, you got 4 left, and then you're going to have to reload unless you've got more guns. That's why people have more guns, in case one of them breaks. And if you have quite a few rioters coming at you and they're not holding off, then you might need more than just a couple of guns. There is sense to it, as mad as it might sound. And so not peaceful, and the military force was because of the curfew, in order to try and prevent further damage. And people are supporting this. That, as the Morning Consult found, to quote their numbers, that for the Washington and the top brass, military would rather fight in the Middle East than keep peace in American cities. Today, poll shows 66% of military favours sending in the troops, with 27% opposed. Among all voters, it's 58 to 30. 58 support. So 71% of polled American voters said they support the use of National Guard to supplement city police forces in addressing protests and demonstrations. Not riots, just the protests and demonstrations. That's how much support there is for Trump's actions. Of these, 42% said they strongly support use of the National Guard, and 29% said they somewhat support it. So, if it's in terms of riots, I would say you could easily get that to over 50%, that over half of voters would strongly support use of the National Guard in riots. Only 11% strongly oppose, and 9% somewhat oppose it. Republicans more likely than Democrats, but not by much, as 63% of Democrats either strongly or somewhat support it as well. African American voters are evenly split, with 43 against and 42 for, which is horrible misinformation for the black community then, that they would think it's not a good idea. And I do sympathise that being lied to so much and then actually believing it, because you push a lie long enough and hard enough, which is shameful that you have such outlets of the legacy media which is encouraging this racial divide. And then in terms of the US military instead of the National Guard, 58% support the use, 33% strongly support, 25 somewhat, 19 strongly oppose, and 11 somewhat oppose. And again, Republicans slightly more likely than Democrats. And it doesn't end there, because then you've got Spike Lee chirping in, and the BBC really should not be trying to suggest that, yes, they should go on an impartial platform. Definitely. Because I'm just going to stick to his conclusion, because it's full of bullshit. Full of bullshit. When they're saying that people are angry because black people are being killed left and right, cops walked away free. 17. So no, you're lying. Either you don't know Spike Lee, in which case you shouldn't be talking, or you're lying to people, in which case you shouldn't be talking about it. And he's trying to say that social inequalities have been particularly evident during the coronavirus pandemic, with people from minorities more likely to die after contracting the disease. Yes, because they're substantially less healthy because of their own life decisions. So he says it's the black and brown people who had to go to work, frontliners of all aspects. They kept this country going, as well as other people, unless you're saying that they're in the low-paid jobs because they're unskilled. But, seems a bit racist, Spike, doesn't it? Yeah. And racism is all over the world. This was a global pandemic before corona. Yeah, I mean, look at China. And this is just great. Just how the lies here. He traced the inequalities in the US back to the country's foundation. The land was stolen from native people. It wasn't. It was bought off, but maybe the Native Americans didn't understand what trading meant, and therefore when they tried to take the land back, the settlers defended what they bought. Simple as that. They didn't allow the native people to steal it back. So, first, lie. Genocide was committed against the native people. That's the intent to wipe out the people, and that wasn't the case. The people who did the most harm were with smallpox blankets from the Puritans, which was long before they discovered germ theory, so they didn't know what they were doing. So it's not genocide. So, lie. And ancestors were stolen from Africa and brought here to work. No. There was a strong slave trade from 3500 BC in what is now Iraq, as it happens, because they're still doing it anyway. And if you look at the Muslim slave trade, it's been about 14 centuries instead of the Atlantic, which was 4. But let's not talk about Islam then, because, why aren't the black people there? It's because they castrate the slaves. They literally castrate them. That is why you don't have a black population over there like you do in Europe and America. And when slavery went into America as well, that it started off with being the whites, because that was done in Britain with the Celtics and the Anglo-Saxons. But as I know, Sargon has mentioned that it all started to unravel in 1066, long before the Atlantic slave trade. And then Britain ended it, and in fact forced African leaders to stop slavery. So we stopped slavery in Africa as well, because that is where they were doing it, and that is where that is where people were buying slaves from, because the African people had already enslaved each other. And then you've got blacks buying other blacks. In fact, so it's a lie. Let's just get a lovely, lovely example here from America, which was in 1654, which says, in 1654, Virginia sanctions the right of Negroes to own slaves of their own race after African Anthony Johnson, former indentured servant, which basically meant you were with them for 7 years, and they didn't care for your lives like as a slave because it was only 7 years, so if they killed you on the 6th year, it was fine. Whereas for a slave, they want you to live as long as possible. So he sued to have fellow African John Caser declared not an indentured servant, but slave for life. From one African to another. Yeah. So, maybe not a race thing, because, you did have white people being indentured servants as well, so maybe it wasn't actually to do with the race at all. And then if you look at the earlier ones settling down, only 5% went into North America, and the rest were into the Caribbean and South America. They were black. So, trying to suggest that it says they were brought here to work, and the foundation of the United States is genocide, stealing land, and slavery. It's all lies. All lies. And trying to say that black people built the country. It's all lies. None of it's true. So, thank you, Spike Lee, for just lying. And well done, BBC, for putting this forward and suggesting any of it is true, because none of it is. So, why are you doing this, BBC? Almost as if you have an agenda for your fake news, and we'll try and use his quotes in order to suggest that we're not saying this, but it's perfectly fine and we should be airing this. It's like, no, not really, BBC. You seem to be presenting this as fact. And hopefully you know it isn't, but I don't think you do. So it's about time you were called out on it. But good news, it looks like people are going to be leaning further right because they want their Second Amendment and they want law and order restored, in which case Trump is going to win in a landslide. Job done. So until next time, have a good one.